Hello and welcome into Rushing the Field. He's Joshua Perry. I'm Nicole Auerbach. We talk about college football from a national standpoint every single week. If you like us, please subscribe, rate, and review us. And Joshua, there is no better place to start than with actual breaking news that is breaking as we are starting to record this, which is that the Pac-12 is no longer going to be just the Pac-2. They have added 4 schools for 2026. They're raiding the Mountain West. They are adding Boise State, San Diego State, Fresno State, and Colorado State. So, Joshua, this brings them up to 6. They eventually need to get up to 8 by 2026, but big moves from the Pac-12.
This is huge, right? We got a 6-pack of schools now, which is important. They got to get up to 8, though, and we'll get into that a little bit later. I actually think that, you start to look at the quality of this and say this can be competitive here. We saw what Boise State did last week against Oregon. They've been a team that's been prominent over a couple of decades as one of the smaller schools in college football, so you certainly love that. Colorado State certainly has a ways to go. I think that they can capitalize off of momentum, though. If they get to an expanded conference, it's going to have some more eyeballs and a little bit more pull. And the Colorado population just as a whole is blowing up, and I kind of look at that as maybe the high school quality gets better, the in-state recruiting can be better for the Colorado schools. San Diego State, again, has played good ball. And then we see Fresno State as one of those teams that's really competitive too. So I think this is actually a great place to start. It's also really interesting. You got all the state schools that are in the Pac-12 now. So maybe as they look to add to get to at least 8, they start to find the trend there as well.
Yeah, it is easy to remember. Every single school has state in their name. So that is easy to remember with the new 6. It's also a couple other details worth pointing out. So they will join July 1st, 2026. This was just announced by the league and by all the schools. So all the applications have been approved. This is how it's going to work. And that the 6 of these schools are going to figure out those final 2 or more members together. There's no real rush on that now that they have the 6. It is going to cost, Joshua, $110 million for these schools to get out of the Mountain West and for the Pac-12 to pay the Mountain West. Because if you remember, they had this agreement, a scheduling agreement for 1 year. It had all sorts of financial penalties to try to avoid, honestly, this exact situation from happening. It would have been a lot cheaper if the Pac-12 just absorbed the entire Mountain West. But they didn't want to do that. They wanted to add the 4 most valuable schools and then decide on the rest later. If they want to add a UNLV or Air Force or somebody else later, of course they're going to want to come because clearly this is the league that you want to be in. This is going to be a lot more valuable than the Mountain West. So the Pac-12 has been hoarding its resources. Mm-hmm. It has, its war chest from settlement with the outgoing 10 schools, contracts like the Rose Bowl, the CFP. Teresa Gould fought for more money in the new expanded CFP deal. So there were a lot of reasons why the Pac-12 was trying to see how valuable it was, how much money it had. And one of those things was to potentially be able to pay for something like this.
Yeah, and it was really smart. And I know that there were a lot of jokes made about the Pac-2 throughout the offseason and kind of getting left behind. But the idea that they were able to stack resources and have a war chest available for this exact thing is big. And to your point, it makes sense to not absorb all of those teams, right? Like you're trying to build the highest quality conference because you want to be able to go to networks and say on a game-by-game basis, we're actually going to have a product that people are going to want to watch week in and week out. They're not going to be a bunch of duds that you have to consume just to get some of the top matchups through the conference. So I think it's really good. And now to your point, they're going to be in a choosing scenario moving forward for those last couple of schools, which I think really sets up for them.
Where would you go? Would you go with other Mountain West schools, or would you maybe go for take shots at the AAC? You could go for a UTSA or North Texas, Tulane. You could go for Memphis. How would you approach this if you're trying to fill those last spots?
No, I think going for some of the AAC schools would be a really good move. You mentioned UTSA. I think they would be a really good one. I think the arrow's pointing up on them.
Yes.
Same thing like Tulane and Memphis have been schools that have done a really good job there. North Texas is a school that's made some noise in the last couple of years. I think those would all be great moves. I think UNLV is one that makes a ton of sense there. And again, just kind of looking at, demographics, population shifts, et cetera, people like Nevada because of the low taxes. And so I think the high school football there, you've got Gorman, and a lot of those guys are national recruits, but you start to look at the quality of high school football and potentially recruiting grounds and building programs. I think that can make sense down the line. The other one that has popped into my head, and just don't know because they just made a move, but like Cal and Stanford, you could stay on the West Coast. It'd be a lot easier travel-wise. Like, I know that for those schools, they probably want to be around more prominent brands, and especially for some of the non-revenue sports, I think being in the ACC makes more sense to them. But it's expensive. That is an expensive endeavor that they got into with all the travel that's required. And I think, a hard push at those two schools would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think with that, you probably are just monitoring because of contractual agreements. I'm sure it would be very difficult for them to get out of the ACC. But listen, part of the Pac-12's, Pac-2's plan here was to wait this out, see what the landscape looks like, see what changes. And it's very possible, maybe even after 1 year, maybe you're hoping that Stanford and Cal realize with their reduced shares in the ACC, all the travel costs, that it's just not worth it. And you want to come home back with two of the members of the Pac-12 that you were just with this more regional league. And we're thinking about a world where, I know we don't talk, in the weeds all the time, but like the house settlement is going to be very expensive. People are going to be spending, they can spend up to $23 million paying players directly year over year. You're going to have to find ways to save money, and regional scheduling is one of the ways to do that. So I actually really like that this is a league right now. Again, you could add Tulane or Memphis, and that kind of throws a little wrench into this, but it does have some, regional ties and relationships and things that make a lot of sense from a college conference standpoint that we honestly don't always see these days because we now have these coast to coast leagues.
I wanted to ask you a question now. If, say Pac-12, they get their 8 teams, will they be a power conference, or would they be like the group of 6 now as the new Pac-12?
Yeah, it's a great question. So basically there's 2 different ways that you would identify a league. So the 8 minimum members is an NCAA thing. So part of what started like power conferences in the first place was NCAA governance reasons, like autonomy. When you hear people talk about that, that's what they're talking about. So the Pac-12 did lose autonomy status and is not being treated as the same as the Big Ten, SEC, ACC, and the Pac-12. And then we just went through negotiations for the expanded college football playoff, the new contract that starts in 2026. They are not being treated the same as the big boys. We also know that the SEC and the Big Ten are going to be taking more money than even ACC and Big 12. But they're also not in the same category as the group of 5 conferences because, again, they were 2 members. And they were fighting for more because they were originally being treated, more towards like what an independent would, like a UMass, UConn situation. So now maybe you adjust some of that. I mean, I think there is, there's going to be a push for this. But honestly, I think the way that you look at it is like it'd probably be treated similarly to how they are at the Mountain West. Where you're kind of fighting for that group of 5 spot, which I think makes a lot of sense. And obviously they're going to want to push for more respect and more governance power and things like that. But, you can only do what you can do at this point. You're a smaller league and it is predominantly Mountain West teams right now. So we'll have to see. We'll see what they do. But listen, they thought it was really, really important to keep the Pac-12 brand, to keep the assets, but the name, like the respect and all the things that come with that, I think is going to help them as they try to continue to gain respect and not just be considered, a Mountain West like reverse merger. One other thing I'll say, Joshua, because we've got the Apple Cup on Peacock. You've got the Apple Cup this weekend. You've got Oregon State this weekend. I don't think the timing of this announcement is an accident. No. 2 days before you have these games where the entire narrative would have been, oh, poor Oregon State, poor Washington State, left behind by their in-state rivals. And now you have this entirely new narrative of them being aggressive, poaching big brands from the Mountain West. And look at the future is brighter than it's been at any point in the last year.
And I still think going into this weekend, they get to leverage the idea that they were left behind too. So they get the best of both worlds, right? Like there's a reality now that this is a situation that looks more and more viable by the day, which is huge for them. But as their teams prepare to play in these games, they get to be like, oh man, they disrespected us, they don't like us, they left us behind. And frankly, Oregon looks more gettable than you thought that they would. Washington, I think, has played some good ball, but like we're still trying to figure out what their transition from Kalen DeBoer to Jed Fish is, and roster turnover and all that kind of stuff. Like it feels like a little bit of spooky season as we head into these big rivalry games that used to be like the conference matchup, and they're not.
Yeah. And listen, playing a Corvallis is difficult. There is going to be a lot of extra emotion in these games. Like it is a fascinating week to have these matchups so early in the season, but we're going to learn some things. And again, there's this whole different narrative as the backdrop for these games now that the Pac-12 is turning into the six-pack. I would just like to say what I would do is definitely handicap the AAC. That would be my strategy.
Yes.
I would try to, because if you handicap the AAC, this is all about supremacy, conference supremacy. So you want to be the premier group of 5 program. You want to be above everyone else, but you also like, what if the ACC needs to backfill? What if they lose some schools? They're going to be looking at teams like in the AAC. So you're essentially like preemptively guarding against that as well. So that's the strategy I would take. Although again, if Stanford and Cal become available and become interested, like, yes, you reunite, you try to do something like that. But that's what I would do. And so this is going to be really fascinating. They have a lot of time. They just have to do this by July 2026. And again, everyone in the Mountain West is going to want to come. They're all going to be making calls, trying to get into this new Pac-12. But again, I think they're going to have some options, and we'll see what the media value is, who's interested. You've got new players like the CW, like Ion, like TNT Sports getting in the mix already for college football rights. So we'll continue to track on all of that. It was breaking news. This just became official on Thursday morning as we were recording. So we wanted to make sure that we started with that for the ticket stub, which is our point of entry into the pod. But we were just talking about these really interesting rivalry games we're going to see this weekend. Let's talk some real football. Let's transition into our stock up, stock down segment, where we are still learning about these teams. We still only have 2 weeks of data. But Joshua, through 2 weeks, the Texas Longhorns, man, they look like a national title contender.
They are fantastic. And I've been so trepidatious about like going all in on Texas because they just haven't been able to get right. And I think last year was the point where it's like, okay, there is confidence. They made it to 14 playoff. Like it's a program that we've all wanted them to be. They just hadn't been. And you play Michigan coming off a national title, certainly a different Michigan team than they were last year. Texas beat them badly, right? Like they controlled that game from the very beginning. And I like what Steve Sarkisian did offensively. Certainly, we look at him as one of the great offensive minds. He created any matchup that he wanted to against this Michigan defense that I do think is extremely talented. Wink Martindale, very veteran coordinator. Like it wasn't an easy task for him to do that. And defensively, they shut down the Michigan offense has been anemic. But the thing that became apparent to me throughout that game, in the lead up, a lot of analysts were talking about Michigan. They can grind it out, and like Texas is good, but do they have it up front? Can they match the toughness? Texas started to play Michigan's game and took that to them. That's the biggest thing that stood out to me. And we know in the SEC, it's big boy ball. I think they're prepared for it, but that was an eye-opening performance from the Longhorns.
Yeah, absolutely. I think right now, coming out of week 2 into week 3, there are 3 teams that I put in that national championship caliber level, right? In that upper echelon. You've got Georgia, you've got Ohio State, and now you've got Texas. I think Oregon has some work to do. We've talked about this on air. We've talked about it on this podcast, like some real concerns with that offensive line, with how Dylan Gabriel is kind of like meshing into his new team. They got some work to do. I think they can do it, but right now they're not in that grouping. There's 3 teams, and it's because you've got a Heisman Trophy caliber quarterback. You're good in the trenches on both sides, and they've got just incredible skill talent. So they've lost running backs. They've had some injuries in the lead up to the season. It hasn't looked like it affected them much, JP.
The running back one is a really interesting point. I'm glad you took it there because that was one of the biggest questions. Like, we know you can throw the ball, but can you have balance to your offense? And their line did a great job of opening up some seams so they could run the ball effectively. But I also love the way that they utilize running backs in the pass game. And I talked about creating matchups with Sark. They isolated the Michigan linebackers in a lot of situations where there was a ton of space for the running backs. And playing linebacker, it's a difficult spot to be in. Like, you've got to make an open field tackle one-on-one. And a lot of times, like, you're at a disadvantage in that situation. And so the scheme at that point can kind of overcome some of the personnel difficulties when you got a guy like Sark. And I think that's a really big point here is even with a thinner running back room, they found answers to keep this offense going.
Absolutely. And again, you look at their schedule, we know that the top teams can lose a game. They're still going to be fine. It's 12-team college football playoff. So you got to feel really good about the Longhorns not making last year a fluke. They are building off of what they have. They are going to be a national championship contender. Here's a team that I don't know if we talked about as like a CFP contender as much as we probably should have. They've looked really good. They had a really emphatic win over NC State, a team that's supposed to be pretty good in the ACC. They absolutely crushed them 51-10. And that's the Tennessee Volunteers. Nico Iamaleava is so good that we've all had to practice pronouncing his name this past week because we got to say it because he could stay in the Heisman conversation. Like, this is an offense with Josh Heupel that is a Josh Heupel offense. This is what Hendon Hooker looked like in this offense, not Joe Milton. This is a team that is really sound. I think really good defensively. That was something we weren't really focused on until what we saw against NC State. But I mean, I feel like we're starting to believe in Tennessee, and looking at that schedule feels fairly manageable. I mean, I think this is a team that's going to be in the mix here, kind of in that maybe second tier in the SEC.
All right, let me get my practice in. Iamaleava?
No, Iamaleava.
Iamaleava. All right.
There you go.
So I'm gonna just call him Big Nico for the sake.
Yeah, we could just say Nico. Nico's a great
his last name.
Yeah, easy.
He is fantastic. We expected him to be able to spin the rock. I think where he's been really good is the chances to run the football, right? And like looking at the last couple of Tennessee quarterbacks, Joe Milton was more of the pocket passer type. Hendon Hooker, I love the way that he threw the football. But like now you're looking at a guy who's got real juice with his legs. And again, coming from a defensive standpoint, it's much harder when you have to account for the quarterback or when you can't just put your best pass rush move because you know the quarterback can escape the pocket. And so he's given them a really good layer with his ability to do that. But the thing that you mentioned that I think is the big thing that people need to watch out for, and Josh Heupel was emphatic about this when he talked about his team after that win against NC State. He said, we are a program that values defense. We want to play great defense. Like that is the standard for Tennessee football. It hadn't been the standard, right? Like if we're being completely honest, the standard was our offense is going to run up the scoreboard and we'll be able to figure out how to get enough stops to be able to win. Not full Lincoln Riley, Alex Grinch, but it was pretty damn close when you start to boil it down. And now they're like, no, like we have put together a defense we feel really good about. And the defense is what's going to make them more competitive this year, if that's what the case is going to be. And so I love that. And now we're starting to really feel what a Josh Heupel program actually looks like. Not a Josh Heupel offensive team, a Josh Heupel program where you have a defense that can come to play. And I love that.
Our last team for stock up, it's the obvious team that has a stock up. We've been talking about them all week. They were the story last Saturday, and it's NIU. Northern Illinois pulls off the upset of Notre Dame in South Bend, the very first top 10 win for a MAC team. They win 16-10, 16-14. The nation falls in love with Thomas Hammock. I mean, incredible interview with Zora Stevenson on the field. And then he's got on a media blitz all week. We've learned so much about NIU. And we learned about this during the broadcast, but this is such a cool tradition for when Northern Illinois beats a Power 5 team. This is what they do. Major programs, I guess is how they've defined it because it's different eras before the Power 5 era. They keep a bone. This is the boneyard. These are the teams that they have taken down over the years. And listen, Notre Dame is joining the boneyard. This is their collection because they have been known to pull off upsets over the history of their program, but still nothing quite like what they did against Notre Dame.
No, it was impressive for sure. And Thomas Hammock, as you mentioned, right, like he's the story that I think a lot of people love about college football. He's a guy who played for that program. He wants to be there. He knows he's coaching an underdog when he's in these big games. And you could tell not only from his emotion in that post game, but like also the contrast between that level of emotion and the calm demeanor that he had on the sidelines all game long, that it meant that much to him. Like he called the risky plays when it was necessary. Yep. He had a really good game plan. Then he put his players in a really good spot. But just the idea of going to your alma mater and being able to, and he's talked about it, right? Like he wants to elevate. He knows what kind of a place it is, but he wants people to recognize Northern Illinois football. They're certainly getting the recognition right now.
Okay, so we've been texting about this, but I want to get your actual thoughts. So he has said that he offered to Marcus Freeman, like, yes, hey, here's how we beat you. Like, here are your weaknesses. Do you want to chat? And Marcus said yes. Mm-hmm. That's so interesting to me. I mean, maybe this happens more often than we hear about, but what do you make of that dynamic?
Well, I know that a lot of coaches on Sundays, they'll have calls and they'll call friends in the industry of opponents that they're getting ready to play, teams that they've played in the past, to do self-scout like that. I do think it's rare that you would get a situation where a coach calls you and just offers up information. And in particular, it feels real weird when it's Northern Illinois, like, hey, you want to know the keys to victory? Like, here's the playbook to beat you guys. Like, it's definitely tough. Marcus Freeman 100% has to take that call, and he should take that information. It's a great thing to know. I also think, just to extrapolate this out into a bigger picture, the coaching fraternity is really small, and these guys all know each other. And there are certainly rivalries, and I love the pettiness that comes with some of it. But a lot of these guys, professionally, they respect one another, and they want to be in a place where they get along. I think in particular for Black coaches, it's a bigger deal because it's almost like people will use anything that happens as an indictment on, or as like the rule for these coaches. And so I think for Thomas Hammock, he's like, here's Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame, certainly a great job. The guy has not been a head coach for very long. How can I help him along his path and be almost a mentor in that situation? So from that perspective, I see the big picture and I love it too.
Yeah. And like, he knows he's in a tough spot now at Notre Dame because he's had losses like this. Plus, I mean, again, we're early in the season. We've been talking about the playoff because it's going to be a different world with a 12-team playoff. But if you are in Northern Illinois and now the door is open to get there, you want Notre Dame to win games. You know, like
they're sitting in that spot right now. You know,
right.
It's like Notre Dame, do your job.
Yeah, now you're rooting. Now you root for Notre Dame the rest of the way. That's all just works. It's a fun sport in that way. So let's start with the Irish for stock down, because again, Marcus Freeman has now had a few of these. Marshall. A lot of people have been bringing up the Stanford loss when there was no reason to lose to Stanford, like some of these clunkers that you would think Notre Dame would be past with a third-year head coach. Where do the Irish go from here? And are there signs of life with this offense and Riley Leonard? Like, can they turn this around and become an offense that can sustain drives, actually score touchdowns, actually throw touchdowns?
Yeah, I'll start with this point, and I'll throw Penn State in this category as well for their performance over the weekend. But I do think that there is this idea that happens where you go on the road for your first game, and it's a big game, and you end up winning. And you come back to campus where everything is now comfortable, and everybody's telling you you've got it figured out. You're making the college football playoff. You're a national championship contender. They're kissing your butt as you're walking around campus. You know, coaching doesn't feel like it's as hard. You don't have to be as hard on your team because you know that they can get the big win. And you have an opponent that's coming in that you think is there just to collect the check. You don't actually believe that they're there to try to win a football game, and they smack you in the mouth. And I think that is a part of what happened for Notre Dame this weekend. But there are bigger issues here. As I started to watch the tape back, and I felt this way on Saturday, but the further I've gotten away from that game, the more I believe this. There were a lot of people like, oh, Notre Dame defense, it gave up too many big plays, whatever. If you can hold a team to 16 points, and in particular a MAC team to 16 points, you're going to win the football game. You should be able to win the football game, right? I don't think their defense played that bad. The one big pass that went for a touchdown was actually a broken play on the offense, and it's not something you can really anticipate or account for defensively. The run game, there were some issues. It was mostly guys jumping in and out of gaps. It's not like they were getting blown off of the ball and bullied around. I thought the defense played fine. This offense is a real issue. Riley Leonard struggles to throw the football, particularly down the field. It is a problem that they have to get figured out because they need to stretch a field at some point. But the biggest issue offensively to me is they don't have enough concepts in the pass game that are run game influenced. What I'm talking about, play action passing. You've got two really good backs in Love and Price. You have to make sure that they are always a threat to the defense in RPOs. With Riley Leonard as a guy who is mobile, they can really triple option from the quarterback position. We saw Ohio State do it over the weekend, but what I'm talking about is you have the run option, then you put your quarterback on the move, and he can either keep the ball or he can throw it out into the flats, throw the hitch, whatever the case is. They need to make that a part of their offense because Riley Leonard is most dangerous when his legs are at play. But I don't think it should be quarterback powers because the dude is injury prone. He's dealing with the shoulder injury right now.
Right.
You need to have it as he can be an option to run, but his legs need to be a threat to the defense in the pass game as well.
Okay, so do you believe that they can do this? Is this something that we need to see this week? I mean, there's already the fan base calling for a quarterback change or at least something different. But Marcus Freeman, everyone's been adamant. Riley Leonard's the quarterback. But I do think we needed to see some of those changes, those adjustments, the emphasis on the run game and the threat of the run game to make this look different.
If they wanted Angeli to be the quarterback, they wouldn't have paid $1 million to a guy in the transfer portal. So let's be perfectly clear about that. And I also think politics come into play as well. When you did pay a guy that much, he kind of has to be your quarterback until it is like fully apparent that he's not. Yes, it's something they can do. I just need to see them do it, right? And these are adjustments they'll have to make if it's not already in the game plan. But I think the best thing to help this offense is RPOs and play actions.
Yeah. Absolutely. Another team that is really reeling also needs to show some signs of life offensively and show that the quarterback play, the offensive line play, that these things can improve over the course of the season. I don't know. Do they have the personnel to do it? We'll see. Is Michigan. Michigan is coming off of a loss to Texas that, again, I think a lot of us thought they would lose to the Longhorns. I do think we thought, even with all the personnel losses and the coaching losses, that they would have a great defense and they would be able to run the ball. Now, they are struggling with the new offensive line. They're struggling with the quarterback. They're struggling to run the ball or sustain drives, which means that your great defensive players are on the field a long time. Also, maybe there's not as many of them on the field at once as there have been in years past. Right. But again, they're on the field all the time. So you just got some issues for Michigan where I don't know from a personnel standpoint if they're going to be able to fix them entirely in season. But I do think this loss, the way that it basically wasn't a game very early, became very apparent which team was controlling the game, which wasn't at the line of scrimmage. I think what it does is you're looking at like a 4-loss Michigan team. I think it completely changes the outlook for all of those challenging games that Michigan has on their schedule the rest of the way.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing too. Like I think the biggest positive for Michigan is all of their pimples were revealed in that game, because you can go through some of these games as well where, Texas plays real sloppy and they play below what they actually are. And the score is much closer than what the teams actually are in their distance. And it allows you to maybe mask some of your issues. All their issues were exposed. I am a Davis Warren defender. I'll start right there. And the more that I've watched that game tape, the more I think that he's dealing with a lot of issues that aren't his own, especially when they had to get into pass mode toward the end, when the margin started blowing out. I like the way he navigated the pocket. I actually think he's got a pretty talented arm. The issue is the offensive line is atrocious at this point. The center position is a real problem, and they've been blessed with really good centers over the last couple of years, like guys who were some of the best in the country. And the right tackle position is a real problem. Like those two guys stand out as soon as you watch the tape. And so he's dealing with that. The other part is they don't have wide receivers that get open. So even if he's got a clean pocket, who's he throwing the ball to? It's probably covered, and that's a real issue as well. But I start to look at this defense, and I do think it's got a chance to be good still, and I think that they're extremely talented. Wink Martindale, I don't think, made the adjustments that he needed to make. And part of that is you're a coordinator for so long, especially at the highest level. You are who you are. You don't want to change, and I get that. The other part of it is college offenses do a lot of stuff that you never see in the NFL. And he was probably sitting there like, what the hell am I looking at? Like, this is not something that is even structurally sound from an offensive standpoint, and Texas does it. They got to get that figured out. And then for all the guys that they have on the D-line that I think are really great players, some of those guys are up there trying to throw their best pass rush move when Texas is running the football, and that is not good team defense. That's something you can fix pretty easily. So they've got issues, but the best thing about this is they should know what all of their issues are right now because they were revealed, and now it's just about finding a plan to make them better.
And the last team for stock down is a team that I don't know if they can get that much better. This is one of the most painful losses we saw in recent memory, honestly, even compared to like some of the upsets, just the way that Arkansas lost this game to Oklahoma State. They nearly doubled them in yards of offense. There were so many different mistakes, so many different moments they could have won this game. I saw somebody compare it to like, this is what maybe an Arkansas booster's fever dream would be. If you really want Bobby Petrino to take over as the interim head coach, or maybe like the full-time head coach, you drop a game like this where the offense did lots of things, so many yards of offense, almost 700 yards of offense, and then you lose this game in like just hilariously terrible fashion. It definitely is not what you want for a hot seat coach in Sam Pittman. Oklahoma State really did not deserve to win this game. It was quite telling about a Big 12 contender. But yeah, it was brutal. So they're in stock down because this is just one of the worst losses that I have seen in recent memory because of how much they outplayed Oklahoma State for so much of that game. It's kind of inexplicable.
Well, Nicole, I mean, we were sitting there watching that game, and we're kind of preparing our remarks for the Arkansas win because they were in control of that football game. That was a game that they should have won. And this is also what happens when you let a team that has a player as good as Ollie Gordon hang around, right? Like, he's the one who put the game away. When you have the opportunities, you got to snuff it out. But I think that's where I kind of ask the question: Have we reached the potential of the Sam Pittman era? Is when you're in control of a football game and you let go of the rope. That's really difficult to overcome.
Yeah, and again, everyone's been waiting for this for the offseason. Like, the fact that Bobby Petrino is back at Arkansas, still mind-boggling. But everyone wondered, hey, are you hiring your replacement? Are you hiring the potential interim head coach? Like, that's where the conversation was the second Bobby Petrino got hired, and we are getting closer and closer to that. This is one of the hottest seats in the country alongside Florida with Billy Napier. All right, we talked about the Boneyard, that the Boneyard wins, Northern Illinois collects. This was a huge, huge upset. So it got us thinking we should power rank the biggest upsets in college football history. These are our power rankings presented by Citibank. And listen, there's only one option for number one. App State over Michigan. Joshua could not have responded faster in the group chat being like, yes, we need to talk about Michigan losing to App State.
I mean, you were at the game. Well, first off, it's actually hilarious. I was at a rest stop in the middle of Indiana when that text came through. And so, of course, I'm like, oh, perfect timing. I pull it over, like, let's go. Yes, you were at this game. So I want to get your perspective of like the range of emotions as you're watching that.
Yeah, so this is unreal. So I'll start off by saying I grew up in Central Jersey, entirely pro sports area, pro sports market. Like, we were unfortunately Jets fans. But Yankees, like we only cared about pro sports. I grew up 20 minutes from Rutgers, and I never went to a Rutgers game until I was covering college football, like professionally. So I end up going to Michigan, and it's mostly because I get guilted there because my aunt and uncle live in Ann Arbor. I was the oldest of my family. We never visited them. Why don't you apply and come to Michigan? It's great, blah, blah, blah. So I end up there, and this is my first game as a freshman. So it is not just my first Michigan college football game. This is my first college football game ever because I grew up going to NFL games. So I am all excited. Michigan's number 5 in the country. You had Chad Henne come back, Mike Hart come back, Jake Long come back. Everyone comes back trying to win a national championship. I missed the 1-2 game, the Michigan-Ohio State game, missed a Rose Bowl, but everyone's like, all right, this is the year. We're coming all the way back to win a national title. And then you go to this game. First of all, I'm also not prepared for it's 90 something degrees. It's super humid. You're in a student section where you have to stand the whole time, which didn't know because, again, first college game. And I'm like dehydrated. I'm a little faint. I'm watching a game that I'm like, this is not how it's supposed to go. I'm with people I don't know because it's assigned seating. And it's just so quiet. That is the thing that I remember so much about, during the game, as you're kind of like, wait, this can't really be happening, can it? And then you have some hope. Okay, they're going to avoid it. Nope, they don't. Game is over and it is silent. There was like a 30-minute walk back up through campus in the sea of Mays fans back to my dorm room. And it was hot and silent. And I just remember the silence most of all. And it was stunning. And then of course, I'm, the only person who went to Michigan out of all of my friends. So then the phone is blowing up. Everyone's texting you. It's historic. You're seeing videos of the reaction of Penn State fans, Ohio State fans, at their games. But it was just unreal. And then, the immediate first thing I did was I was so excited to have a student season ticket, t-shirt. But then I was I can't wear this ever again. It says App State right on the top of the back of the shirt. I had to burn it. I had to get rid of it.
Oh man, what a time to be alive. I will say this about the Big House is it's not, even in the best environments, it's not the loudest place in the world because it's shallow. The build of the stadium. But I've played there in a blowout where my team was winning. That place gets real quiet. It
does.
It's an interesting thing. I remember the reactions off of this game as well. And the video still holds up to this day of the way the end of that game went. It was phenomenal. But certainly one of the most memorable upsets in any sport for me.
Yes. So that's number 1 for our list. I'll just list off the rest in case you're not watching on YouTube. But number 2, we got Stanford over USC in 2007. USC heavy favorites in that game. That was a stunner. 2017, Howard defeating UNLV. This was the largest point spread upset in college football history, 45-point underdogs. And Howard pulls it off. This was actually the first time I talked to Brennan Marion and that go-go offense that he runs, which is, he has now, he has taken that to a number of different schools and is at UNLV of all places right now, helping to rebuild there. Number 4, JMU beating Virginia Tech all the way back in 2010. So this was JMU is a power, but they're still at a lower level. They're not quite like the household name that they are now, where we expect that kind of football success from them. And then Joshua, this one is for you. Number 5, we put Purdue beating number 2 Ohio State in 2018. Now, this might not be on everyone's all-time upset list, but the way that game felt and the way that it happened at Purdue, this was in the era where Ohio State sometimes did this. Yes. And, and you go into an environment like a Purdue environment, all the narratives coming into this game, and that happened. It was a stunner. That was a Tyler Trent game, correct?
Yes.
As well?
Yep. And so that's why I pushed for this one at the end. First off, for all the Ryan Day can't win the big one talk, Urban had some real nasty losses in terms of upsets there. But this was the number 2 team in the country. They weren't favored by a ton. I think it was a 2-touchdown favorite in this game, but they end up losing the game by a bunch of points. Was a 29-point loss or whatever it was there. They forced Dwayne Haskins into throwing the ball 70 times in that game because they were playing catch up from the jump. But it was the Tyler Trent thing that really made this feel like it was a destiny victory for Purdue, where you've got one of their biggest super fans who is going through some real medical issues, who is at that game. And it felt like everything was destined for Purdue to be able to muster up not just an upset, but one in very dominant fashion. And so I wanted to put that up there. The other one I want to talk about real quick is this Stanford USC in 2007. It's Pete Carroll, and this is kind of like the end of the USC run as one of the national powers. And you've got this guy named Jim Harbaugh who's there at Stanford. And, he's former college NFL quarterback. He was at San Diego, kind of small school coach. What's he going to do with Stanford? And this was really when Stanford started their run of being a team that was nationally prominent, playing in Rose Bowls. And that situation kind of in their new era of success. And so I think the contrasting trajectories of those schools intrigues me. The JMU one, Virginia Tech was one of those schools back in the day that was like, hey, man, this is going to be a nationally relevant program. And it kind of started the beginning of the end for them, too. So some of these upsets almost like mark changes and eras for some of the schools.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that for Michigan definitely did. They lost to Oregon the next week. That convinced the powers that be, you've got to go get a spread offense coach. They hire Rich Rod. That was my era at Michigan. It was started with App State and it ended with the Brady Hoke hire. Like those were
That's a tough era.
Jeez, it is the losingest stretch of Michigan football history either. You would be so
we
happy.
Can attribute that to you then.
Yeah, I might not have been great luck for Michigan. But I was present at the national championship game last year and they still won that. Wow. So maybe it's turned around. All right, let's do some week 3 preview and picks. We pick 3 games each week to give a little extra attention to. And this slate is a little light overall, which makes me think either we're going to get a lot of duds or we're going to get some crazy upsets that we're not even seeing on the board right now, because sometimes that's how these weeks go. But let's start with some of the big name matchups this week. Alabama goes to Camp Randall, plays Wisconsin. They're favored by 16.5 points. They are top 5 in the country. They struggled against USF for like 3 quarters and then pulled away late. But Wisconsin also not super impressive through 2 games so far this season. I love that this game is happening. I love that we're getting a game on campus like this. We've seen some big games so far this season, a lot at neutral sites. It's awesome to see Alabama come to Madison. But I also think that the Tide are going to roll. I mean, this is a Wisconsin team that I still think is trying to figure out who they are, and an Alabama team that, despite the USF struggles, is still extremely talented. You still have Jalen Milroe. I trust Kalen DeBoer. I think they're going to have a really good first year under him, and I think they're going to win and cover in Madison.
I agree with you on that. It's hard for me to find an angle in this game where I think Wisconsin has a true edge, even with the environment of Camp Randall, which I do think is phenomenal. I've played there and I've covered games there. It's going to be difficult for them. And even sloppy play from Alabama, they still have the weapons on the outside that can change the game in a minute. You mentioned Jalen Milroe and what he can do. And I think that they're pretty tough defensively still as well. So for Wisconsin, I think this is going to be a real toughie, but 16.5 feels like it might not be enough at this point.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like that game looked great on the schedule. Yeah, might not be great in actuality. So let's talk about a game that I don't know if anyone would have circled 3 weeks ago, but I can't wait to watch. And this is number 24, Boston College, at number 6, Missouri. Listen, the Tigers are favored by 17 points. I think that's because you've got BC going to an SEC school. Missouri has arguably the best receiver room in the country. Mm-hmm. And like, they're really fun. They had a breakthrough season last year. They're going to be, they're a team I've got in the mix for the CFP. Absolutely. But Boston College is a surprise team already this season. What they did to Florida State. They're 2-0. Bill O'Brien really does feel like he could be the guy that gets BC into I don't know if we're talking like ACC contender, but like a respectable Boston College program. I think we've already seen improvements on the offensive and defensive line under him. Yes. So I like this game. I think this is a fascinating game. And like, this will tell us a lot about, Thomas Castellano and company for BC, but also for Mizzou. Like, if they are really going to contend or be in the mix in the SEC, contend for one of those last CFP spots, we'll see a lot of that against I think a quality opponent in BC.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Castellano's an interesting one for me. I love the way that he can run the football. I think he's got some work to do in terms of just straight drop back. And Missouri is a team that is not only really well coached, but I think they're more talented than people want to give them credit for. BC, as tough as they are and the improvements that they've made, I still think that Missouri can roll in this one. I'm struggling to figure out if I want to take Missouri in the 17. BC is tough, but Missouri, I feel like they're on a little bit of a war path right now. And in any game like this, that's a ranked matchup, I think they do have to make some noise. So I'm going to trust them to cover the 17.
All right, I'll take BC in the points just to keep it interesting. We can't always make the same picks. So I'll trust BOB and the Eagles. All right, third game I want to hit on is Oregon State. Another big spread. This is 16.5 points. But the game is at Corvallis. Oregon has some questions they need to answer, especially on the offensive line. Finally, not playing a team from the state of Idaho. I think we can all agree that that was not good. They struggle with Idaho. They go toe-to-toe with Boise State, need a field goal at the end to beat them. What do you make of this game? What do you make of this matchup? Oregon State was a team that was left behind. Coach leaves. Some of their best players leave in the portal as well. But, like, man, if you are an Oregon State fan or player, coach, whatever, like, this is your Super Bowl going against Oregon.
It is. And it's hard for me to figure out Oregon. Like, it stinks for them because the first 3 games of their season have really been like Super Bowl games. You got the FCS team coming into town, and it's like, oh, they play them really tough. Then you've got the group of 5 team who is actually like a team that has a chance of making it to the playoff with one of the best players in the country, Ashton Genty. And it's like, all right, well, that's a tough one. Oregon State, their roster, as you mentioned, not what it was a year ago, but they're in Corvallis. Oregon has some real issues right now. You mentioned the offensive line, and I know we only have a small sample size here. Statistically, we're looking at the worst defense in the Big Ten as well. Like, points per game, they have not been very good. And I think Oregon State is going to be extremely fired up for this one. I don't feel like I'm going to take Oregon State in the points at this juncture because I have too many questions about Oregon. And I think they got to get right in this game. Like, I think this is the game where Oregon's got to play some good football.
I'm going to take Oregon because I think they're going to get all of those frustrations out. I mean, Dan Lanning has not been happy at the end of either of these first 2 games. And I think, like, they will finally put it together and make a statement for all the people saying, hey, I thought you were going to contend in the Big Ten in year 1. Hey, I thought you were going to be a CFP favorite. I think they're going to show us that in this game in Corvallis. All right, let's go to some.
You want to real quick? Let me give a stat here. Dan Lanning 1-4 against rivals.
A lot of those are Washington.
Yeah,
right.
There's a Oregon State in there as well.
Okay. All right. We'll track that one. That one's going to be fun. As well as the Apple Cup. I mean, listen, it's weird that these games are in September because of realignment and the fact that Washington and Oregon are now going to end their seasons against each other, which I love. But yeah, this is going to be fun. I love getting rivalry games whenever we get them. There are also some really interesting potential upsets that are on the schedule. There's a lot of like 2, 3, 4 point spread games. But then there's also some that I think you and I are both willing to pick an underdog pick. This is rushing the field after all. So the one I'm picking would not necessarily rush the field because they are on the road, but I am picking Memphis plus 6.5 over Florida State. Now I think I'm going to pick them to win. This is a Florida State team. Yes. Come on. Yes. Joshua's nodding in case you can't see this.
I'm nodding hard.
Whew. Okay. DJ Uiagalelei, not capable of winning a game for Florida State, like when the game is on the line, stepping up. Huge drop off defensively at multiple levels of the defense for Florida State. And listen, they have not looked good against either of the teams that played in Georgia Tech and BC. Now they finally got a break, but like there is clearly a formula for how to beat and how to play Florida State. Memphis is one of the top group of 5 teams. They're contending for the group of 5 spot in the CFP. Huge game, huge game for them. And Florida State is just reeling. I just don't think that they have the right players this season. Like, this is normal. It's normal to rebuild after you have all these star guys that come together for a special season that guys came back for. It's normal that there's a drop off. This drop off is really significant. And I think obviously the message boards, everyone will be in free fall if they start the season 0-3. But I'm going to take Memphis to do it. I think that they are going to make some noise. It's going to be a huge feather in the cap for a CFP spot.
I agree. I'm with you. A lot of people picked Memphis to be the group of 5 representative in the college football playoff this year. It's a good football team. Florida State, as of right now, a very bad football team. everything you said. Defensively, they're not what they were supposed to be. We heard people talking about best defensive line in the country. They look like a high school defensive line right now. And I'm trying to be kind as I say this. DJU, my favorite part of watching the games is when they put the graphics up and it's like DJU is 4 of 5 for passes behind the line of scrimmage. And he's 0 of 7 for passes that traveled more than 5 yards down the field. It is real bad right now. So I'm there with you. I'm going to give my pick, but I'm also pat myself on the back real quick. My pick from last week actually did rush the field. I had Illinois beating Kansas. That was a good game there. So hopefully I can keep my streak going here. We've got LSU. They're at South Carolina. South Carolina 6.5-point underdog. I'm going with the Gamecocks in this one. LSU didn't necessarily look great in week 2. I think they were playing McNeese. They gave up a ton of points in that game. I'm looking at South Carolina, who's playing at home. It's going to be a nationally prominent game. They've got College Game Day there. It's going to feel different for the players. And for Shane Beamer, I think he's got to get a big win. Like, there's a lot of pressure for him to get a big win, more so than there is for LSU to beat South Carolina. And so I like the dynamics that play into this one. I certainly think it is going to be close, but I like South Carolina to pull off the upset.
I was so close to picking this one too, because Shane Beamer's South Carolina teams have done this, right? Like
Yes.
when there's really no great reason to believe that they have momentum or like going to have a shot against like a top 10 team, they do it. So I thought about that as well. Also don't trust LSU. That was a close game for far too long.
I don't trust them either.
And when Brian Kelly is like having meltdowns in week 1, and he's banging the table and the water bottle's flying, like just not a great vibe to start the season. So I think that's also a great pick. And yes, shout out to Illinois for promoting the pod by rushing the field for them as well.
We love that. It was a very gentle rush though. There were a lot of people.
It was like the
concourse, walking down the stairs to get there.
Yeah, I didn't realize, was that the only way to go, or it was just like kind of a casual rush? But still, really good win over Kansas. Kansas fans are not happy about playing Illinois in general, but also that they lost that game. Speaking of rushing the field, RTF, our pod, it is time for WTF on RTF. We find something ridiculous every single week that we need to show you. And this week was a really good one. We appreciate Payton Thorne for having a really good sense of humor and like I think a healthy approach to criticism. He threw 4 interceptions. Auburn loses to Cal. And he goes and does an interview with the Next Round to talk about fans' reactions to a loss to Cal and the 4 interceptions thrown by him. He says he's been getting Venmo requests from fans.
Coming after your Venmo, Peyton?
Explain that one to me. I've never heard that. Like, they send you cash?
No.
They're definitely not sending cash. Okay. It's funny when they lose money, they want the money back, but when they win money on a parlay, no one's ever sending any money.
So first of all, shout out to Payton Thorne. I don't think I would be able to joke about this coming off of a loss like that. But also, like, this is actually a really interesting look into sports gambling and college sports right now, and all levels of sports. Like, the fans are taking it out on the players. Like, we hear this with fantasy football too. Like, you're getting nasty messages from these fans, which is ridiculous. Like, these are human beings. But again, shouts to Payton Thorne for like laughing it off.
Yeah, no, he took it in stride. I guess we got to do the whole PSA thing. Fans don't do this. Like, it's not an appropriate thing to do. It's not really funny. And also, this is what you get for betting on college quarterbacks. Like, I would never. This is not something that is not like I'm allowed to, but like if I could, I wouldn't do it. Like, the college kids, absolutely not. I will say this though: the Venmo requests from fans, probably not a great thing, not a good feeling. The message boards have the people who donated to collectives asking if they can get a refund, and that is a real tough spot.
Wow.
Yes.
Well, okay, so like that's, I feel like actually worth a conversation of like, if these are the people you're basically having pay salaries because you don't pay salaries directly.
Yep.
Interesting questions, but don't Venmo request players. Please don't get in their mentions after they have a bad game. They already know that they did. They already know that they did, and they're also not going to give you any money. But points for creativity, never do it again. to the and to all fan bases, please. And oh yes, please be careful if you're betting on college quarterbacks or college kickers. Joshua's really down on specialists.
I'm out. I mean, Notre Dame. How about that? Right? Block kicks. Yeah.
Multiple block kicks. There were actually some game-winning field